Hi everyone, this is Dan Clanton, and this is our mini lecture over Mary in the medieval church. Mary, the mother of Jesus, had always been important in Christianity, but her centrality in Christian thought and praxis soared in the medieval period. As early as the writings of Justin Martyr in around 155, Mary had been known as the quote-unquote second Eve, implying that her actions somehow wiped away the sinful existence brought about by Eve's participation in the disobedient act in the garden, narrated in Genesis chapters 2 to 3. This idea of Mary as the second Eve also heightened her virginal status over and against Eve's assumed sexuality. Now, this imagery was linked with Paul's view of Christ as the quote-unquote second Adam, found in Paul's letter to the Romans, and as such, the Mary-Eve symbolism was fraught with more than a little confusion. It was also during the 4th and 5th centuries that asceticism became prevalent, and this practice of denying the body and our more base sexual impulses in order to focus and emphasize our spiritual nature also fed into various views of Mary's quote-unquote perpetual virginity, an idea endorsed by such early writers as Ambrose and Jerome. In medieval theology, there's an emphasis on Jesus the divine judge. Jesus becomes more and more divine, more and more powerful, more and more cosmically relevant, and as such, his humanity is de-emphasized. A corollary to this theme is the exaltation of Mary's mercy, as well as the view that Mary is the mediator of divine grace. As Rosemary Radford Ruther writes, quote, "As Christ becomes more to be feared, trust is transferred to Mary." Not only was Mary exalted in theology, her image also adorned many cathedrals, as you can see here in this image of the tympanum on the west facade of Chartres. We see Mary seated centrally on the seat of divine wisdom, the Christ child in her lap, and in the lower panels of the tympanum we find representations of both the Annunciation and the Nativity. In the early Middle Ages, there was a controversy over applying the title of Mother of God to Mary due to possible implications about Jesus' human nature. That is, if Mary is the mother of God and Mary is human, does that mean that she could only give birth to a human child? Eventually, this theological problem is resolved by the claim of the Council of Chalcedon in 451 that Jesus' divine and human natures mingled. In any case, veneration of Mary as the Mother of God elevated her status immensely, as seen in Cimabue's altarpiece from the late 13th century. Note especially what art historians call the hierarchic grading present in this portrayal of Mary, that is, the relative size of Mary compared with the Christ child. As Mary's stature grew, more supernatural actions began to be attributed to her. This painting, sometimes called The Lactation of St. Bernard by Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, reflects a 14th century legend about Bernard of Clairvaux, a devotee of Mary. According to the legend, Bernard was praying intensely before a statue of the Virgin, saying, "Monstra te esse matrum," show yourself a mother. The statue came to life, and Mary pressed her breast to nourish and wet the lips of Bernard, dry from singing her praises. There is an interesting emphasis on the power of Mary's breast milk during this period, as we'll see. Mary grew and grew in importance until some theologians and artists began to view her as a partner in the intercession for humanity traditionally ascribed to Christ alone. This anonymous painting, usually titled "The Cloister's Double Intercession," shows an artful arrangement of God, Christ, and Mary, with Christ saying, in what is almost a comic book balloon, "My Father, Let those be saved for whom you wished that I suffer the passion. Mary, expressing milk from her breast onto the worshippers of Christ, says, quote, Dearest Son, because of the milk that I gave you, have mercy on them, thus highlighting her intercessory role during this period. In conclusion, Marian devotion has survived in Catholicism, especially in Latin and South American forms of religious practice. However, religious practices and theological views centered around Mary never were all that prominent in Protestant forms of Christianity. But the ways in which Mary was imagined and represented in both academic and aesthetic discourses is highly important for us to pay attention to, as we attempt to understand not only how Mary, and women in general, are understood and depicted, but also how Christianity itself develops. This has been our mini-lecture over Mary in the medieval church. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.